Welcome to the Clothed in Glory campaign, where we hold gender justice conversations. This is one of 7 episodes that are available on YouTube. You can find the rest of the videos in our playlist under Clothed in Glory.
And with us today on the call, we have 2 colleagues of mine from Sojourners, and I'm so excited for them to share. They'll be sharing about how we can wear our Sunday's best and share on social media and with others in our community to really draw attention to the maternal health crisis in the United States, and to ask our Congress people to address that crisis through meaningful legislation. So we'll be sharing some of that. I want to pass it on to Reverend Moya Harris. As I mentioned, she's our Church Network Coordinator, Fellowship Program Director. She has served in many different capacities over her 15 plus years in ministry, and she's also a registered nurse with over 27 years of experience. And she's going to share with us why are we talking about this as Christians? Why should we care about this maternal and newborn health, and kind of frame our conversation through that? So take it away, Reverend Moya.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so excited to be here, and I was just grateful that I was asked to be in this space. For some, fashion and faith are not something that really connect. However, in the Black church tradition that began in the hush harbors during the era of slavery, enslaved Africans would steal away for worship on their own terms, for a time away from the slave owner's ear. And in these spaces, they embraced their humanity and their God. They found strength and encouragement. And then later, as our churches were founded, the Black church became the center of Black folks' lives. The church became school, it became mutual aid, it became fellowship. It became a place to be healed physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And in this sacred space, Black folks wore their very best. It was a way of showing up. They wore clothes that were clean and set aside. It might be the only set of clothes that they had like that, but they saved it for Sunday morning, and they saved their best, and they worked hard for it, and they held their heads high. It was in these spaces that oftentimes this was the only space they could be leaders. They could actually stand up in their dignity and do what God called them to do in a way with their Sunday best on. They saved their best for God, and they worked with their heads held high. This space, they actualized their faith by wearing something that symbolized their humanity, and it gave them a chance to reset for the week. Their reverence for God was represented in their clothes. So it wasn't about wearing the best clothes to be showing off. It's just, this is how I'm articulating how I love myself and I love God. So wearing their church clothes was showing that they were human. The women, who often were not afforded places in leadership in the church, the unwritten hierarchy of power amongst the women might be represented in the church hat. The women showed up and showed out. They showed their power, their authority that was often unwritten through their hats and their heels and the dresses that they wore. Self-dignity and self-respect, faith and health go hand in hand for women. When you look good, you feel good. When you wear a beautiful hat or a suit, something happens and you feel like you're just a little bit better. You put on that lipstick, you might not have anything else, but for that moment, you feel better. And then when you actualize that self-dignity, realizing that God is concerned about you, it allows women the strength and boldness to advocate for themselves and for others. And it's in this that you can connect. Caring about yourself, knowing that God cares for you, causes you to go to the doctor, to care for yourself when you're pregnant, to care for your children in ways to advocate for one and another. So in this space, I hope that this connects theologically, this ontological, this way of knowing and seeing yourself in the world connects to God, because wearing your best meant that you reverenced God and you reverenced yourself. So I look forward to what my colleague, Sister Lauren, I'm saying sister because I'm in church mode now, so I'm talking about church, is going to say even more about this connection, because I could go into the whole nursing part, but I'm not a nurse right now. I am a nurse, but I'm not operating as a nurse. So, but I ask that when you see these women with these beautiful hats, you are witnessing a form of resistance. You are seeing these women who are challenging what society is telling them that they aren't anything. This is their theology. They are showing that their God is awesome and they are walking in that awesomeness. These women are saying, I deserve the best. My body deserves the best. My unborn baby is holy because God loves me and I'm considered holy as well. So with that, I say, God bless you. And I look forward to how we can work through this to fight for Black women's and children's rights who are very much marginalized in society. God bless you.
Amen. And thank you, Reverend Moya, for those words and for sharing your own experience and your own connection to this. Before we hear from Lauren about some more specifics about why do we say that there's a crisis? What are some of the statistics? What are some of the things? We'll now watch a short video that talks a little bit more about this tradition of wearing your Sunday's best. Well, hopefully that video gave you a little visual of what we're talking about when we're talking about wearing our Sunday's best. Now I'll pass it to Lauren. Lauren Reliford, MSW, is our political director. She has over 10 years of experience in research, policy, advocacy, and government relationships. And she also earned a master's degree in social work that focused primarily on the biological impacts of trauma in high risk and vulnerable populations. So it is a true privilege to have Lauren with so much wisdom, but also passion and excitement to share about this issue with all of you. So with that, I'll pass it on to you, Lauren.
Yes, hi, thank you. And I'm sorry, I'm a little emotional watching that video, in part because I'm wearing my grandmother's hat. My grandmother passed away a little over a year ago, and this may be a tradition for folks, but after someone passes, you sort of go through the house and you try to find things about that person. Maybe this is a bad Harry Potter reference, but like Horcruxes, right? It's pieces of this person where their spirit is really alive in them, and it allows you to carry on their honor and their tradition. And so right now, I am wearing one of my grandmother's church hats. And this really inspired me in this campaign because my grandmother took church very seriously, and God was very close to her heart. And for her, and like Rev Moya said, and in the video, she said, the Lord's house is a very special place. And just like folks dress up to go to weddings, dress up to go to funerals, you dress up to show reverence and honor and respect for the event and for what you are getting ready to do. And so, there's certainly a come as you are, but the hope is you're coming in to God's space, to God's temple, by showing him that you're going to show up and show out and adorn this temple that he's given you and show that you take care of your body and your soul. And so hopefully it's an external expression of the internal reverence and worship that you have. So thank you so much for letting me be a bit vulnerable. I did not expect that, but I do hope that my grandmother's spirit is alive here with me right now. So I'm going to get into it. I've prepared a few slides, and I will actually be happy to share them. Let me pull them up. We talked a lot about maternal health, and it's kind of a prescient topic, if you will, right now. But I really wanted to just call the attention to the fact that this means a lot for me as a Catholic. And so I'm taking from what Pope John Paul II said, is that all human life, from the moment of conception and through all subsequent stages, is sacred. So I'm really inspired to, or at least I really feel like part of my calling, part of my fascination with maternal health and newborn health and child health is this idea that life through all subsequent stages, from conception until death, is sacred. And so what does it mean at that critical moment of life, that first 18 months to 3 years, where all of this brain development happens, right? Really, the stage is set in those first 18 months to 3 years for a new life. And so what does it mean to take care of not just mother, but child, understanding that they're very interdependent, but also recognizing that we're actually in the middle of a maternal mortality and morbidity crisis. So why should you guys care, right? Some folks may be saying, I'm not a woman, I'm not a Black woman, I don't ever intend to get pregnant. There's a lot of reasons why folks can come up with why they shouldn't care, but I want to root us in some of the why before we get into the sciencey stuff. And for me, like I said, I'm Catholic, so I very much look to Catholic social teaching. I am also a Jesuit Catholic, if you will, and so really looking at what the Society of Jesus or the Jesuits say about life in general. And it really makes it clear that we are commanded to care for one another. 1 Corinthians more or less tells us that when one suffers, we all suffer. And when one experiences joy, we're all honored by that, right? And so there's this interconnectedness, this interdependence, not just between the mother and the newborn, but us sort of as, you know, all branches in one part of vine, that really calls us to look when folks are suffering, when folks are experiencing undue burdens, and find ways in which we are being called to action. And so again, it's how do we care for the whole person? How do we act as men, women, as human beings for others? And what does it mean to care for God's creation? And so I think considering the fact that, again, we are in the midst of one of the worst maternal mortality and morbidity crises in at least the industrialized world, again, we're really being called to look at what that means. And so I just want to talk about how we are then going to essentially preserve the life and dignity and worth of this new life by focusing on the maternal health crisis. So when I say the industrialized world, that is sort of a fancy term for the West. We're just going to be very honest. It's sort of rooted in a bit of colonialism, imperialism, so it's pretty problematic. But when you look at it, these are sort of our main trade partners. These are our major diplomatic partners. And so that's how we're grouping. That's how they're traditionally grouped. If you look, we are dead last in maternal mortality ratios. So that means that we have the highest rates of women either experiencing death and or chronic injury or illness before, during, and after pregnancy. That's a huge problem because a lot of these deaths are preventable, right? And so not only is the United States dead last, we're almost double the rate in France and Canada. And then look how it just steadily declines from the United Kingdom, which is now Britain and the European Union, Australia, Switzerland, Sweden, Germany, Netherlands, Norway, New Zealand. That is unacceptable, right? How can we say in this country that we care about life, that we are committed to ensuring that everyone is able to prosper, that everyone is able to thrive, if we're allowing that life force, the mother, the one who brings this life into the world, to die needlessly? So I just want to get into a few more stats to really help underscore the problem. Again, US maternal mortality rate is the highest, and we are the last amongst industrial countries. And I want to maybe take a step back and really get into what is maternal mortality and morbidity. Maternal mortality picks up that word mortality and it means death. So that's, again, death due to pregnancy and or labor, and that can occur during, immediate, like in labor, and then it's about 60 days after, 60 days to actually a year after birth is what they would consider a maternal death, if the woman dies as a result of pregnancy. Morbidity really just talks about an issue or a disease. So examples of morbidity that we may talk about are heart disease, stroke. These are things that don't necessarily kill you, but certainly decrease your quality of life and become a chronic condition that you then have to manage. So imagine that women are basically getting chronic illnesses or chronic injuries after pregnancy that they then have to deal with and manage their health well after a child is born. That sounds a little crazy, right? And so now that I've sort of table set the conversation, what does this mean? So these stats are actually a little dated because there's not actually 660 maternal deaths in the United States per year. We're actually now at 700 women die each year. So that's just the maternal mortality rate. And I'm going to say something even more shocking is that's actually an undercount. because it wasn't until recently that across the board, states actually had to put maternal death as cause of death on death certificates. So there are some states where women are dying, maternal mortality, and they're not actually captured. So it may say blood clot or hemorrhage, but it doesn't actually attribute it to the pregnancy. So again, I say 700 women, and some folks may say that's a small number. And I'm like, no, that's a big number. That's bad. 700 people should never die. That's what's going on, essentially. Some of the causes for death and disability due to pregnancy vary. So I mentioned some of them, but death from hemorrhage is most likely to happen during pregnancy and labor. And so hemorrhaging is a relatively common problem. It just means when women are bleeding excessively throughout the labor and delivery process. And it can be preventable, but unfortunately you hear a lot of issues with women essentially having to beg a doctor to look deeper into, I think I'm bleeding too much or something is wrong, and being ignored. And there's lots of reasons why that happened that I can get into, but I'm not going to get into right now. And so that's, again, when we say preventable, death from hemorrhage is a preventable death, and yet it's still happening at high and alarming rates. There's also deaths from heart and mental health related conditions, and those include substance use and suicide. I know a lot of folks may have heard of postpartum depression. Postpartum depression is a real thing. I don't know if any woman has ever had to just deal with depression or mental health issues in general. And you know that it's debilitating, right? I think when people say, oh, I'm just sad, it's like, no. Depression is when you can't get out of bed and you haven't showered for 3 weeks because you are physically unable. Depression at a clinical level impacts you at a social and physical level that doesn't allow you to function, quote unquote, normally. And that's why when you say postpartum depression, it's an issue, because can you now imagine a woman who's so depressed that she's unable to take care of herself, and yet she has a newborn life that is entirely dependent upon her for their survival, right? So postpartum depression is a huge, huge deal. And again, you see mental health related conditions most common in the postpartum period. So that is after birth. Why are we talking about specifically Black women? For me, it makes sense. I am a Black woman. I come from a long line of Black women, and I kind of just love being a Black woman, right? So you would think, oh, of course she's going to talk about this. No. 700 women die from pregnancy or labor-related conditions every year. However, amongst that 700, different communities, different racial ethnic groups actually are higher at risk, right? So a good way to compare this is thinking about the gender pay gap, right? We know that for women, it's 78 cents on the dollar for every white male. However, if you actually look at it from a racial or ethnic background, the 78 cents on the dollar is really representative more of white women. For Black women, it's between 65 to 68 cents on the dollar. For Hispanic Latinx women, I think it's 58 cents on the dollar. And then for Native and Indigenous women, it's like 54 cents on the dollar. So again, it's not just enough to look at the 700 deaths. We really, and I think we're being called to, really look at where the suffering is most acute, sort of where that real pain pinpoint is, and address that, right? Because when you address sort of that worst of worst conditions, what you do is essentially create a system that works for everyone. Because now all of a sudden you're covering all of the contingencies and all of the different ways that things can essentially go wrong. And that improves care, not just for Black women, but it creates an ethic of care for all women. And I think that is sort of why my hope is that, yes, we're focusing on Black women, but folks understand again that when one suffers, we all suffer, right? Because we all then suffer and we all become at risk of falling into the same reasons for maternal mortality and morbidity that Black women are experiencing. So the maternal death rate for Black women is actually 2.5 times the rate for white women and 3 times the rate for Hispanic women. So that's a big, big, big deal, right? So that means that as a Black woman, regardless, you are at 2.5 times a greater risk of dying than a white woman. And 3 times, your risk is 3 times higher than a Hispanic woman. And if we go even deeper, we find that socioeconomic stability is still not a protective factor for Black women. So when I say socioeconomic stability, I mean, some folks say, well, of course, if you are impoverished or you are living in a place in which you don't have access to care, of course you're going to be more at risk. No. Research has shown that a Black mother with a college education is still at a 60% greater risk for maternal death than a white or Hispanic woman with less than a high school education. So again, race is the deciding factor here. So I'm just going to go by this next slide. Again, why should we care? Because the mental is physical, right? There's a huge issue of trauma that goes on in Black and Brown communities. And trauma is actually passed down. I think a lot of folks think, oh, you go through a traumatic event and it rocks your world and that's fine. But trauma actually creates allostatic, or what they call loads of stress that sit in your body and impact your actual ability for your brain to develop healthily. So imagine a Black woman who's already at high risk and is going through a very stressful high-risk pregnancy. All of that stress and trauma is translated to the child. So even before the child is born, they are already facing challenges or potential hindrances to healthy development. So we have to take care of women, right? And I can go on for days and days, but again, trauma leads to disrupted brain development. It influences affect regulation and aggression and can cause developmental problems and important neural pathways. So that's why when we talk about maternal, newborn, and child health, it's got to be all the same. Because a healthy mom means healthy baby, means a child who's actually who's going to have a greater chance of thriving and actualizing their potential in God. So what is one of the things that you can do? And this is a bill that I am obsessed with. I think we'll be able to share out slides, but also if you pick up your phone and open up the phone app, the camera app, and you hold your camera app over to this little square right here, that's called a QR code, and it'll actually take you to what the Momnibus Act is. And this was a bill introduced by Representative Alma Adams out of the 12th District in North Carolina, who is a hat wearer. So if you ever want to check out someone with some amazing hats, I highly recommend Representative Alma Adams. I also recommend Frederica Wilson, who actually fought a rule on the House that said you could not wear hats because she said it's a cultural thing. It's part of my culture. And they actually changed the rules, realizing that there was something bigger than wearing a hat, and it was more of a respect thing. So those are just two amazing women. Lauren Underwood from Illinois, 14th District, also introduced this. And Kamala Harris, when she was in the Senate, was a big proponent of this bill. And this bill is really to address the current Black maternal health crisis. It would make critical investments in what we call social determinants of health. And social determinants of health are all of those things needed to help folks thrive, right? So it's not just enough to say I have a job. If you have a job, that's great. But if you're unhoused or you are living in unsustainable housing conditions, you are probably not living in a place that is going to keep you healthy and safe, and that's going to impact your job, right? You need transportation, you need food, you need healthy communities. So they're looking at the fullness of life and the way in which our communities sustain that life and ensuring that those things are in place to make sure that we're addressing some of the stressful adverse experiences that women and children go through. It also would provide funding to community-based organizations in addition to faith organizations working to improve maternal health outcomes. And it would grow and diversify the perinatal workforce. 86 out of 154 counties in Georgia do not have an OBGYN. So can you imagine being a pregnant woman and having to travel maybe 50, 60, 100 miles for every visit? And as you get closer, you have to travel more, right? That's a big deal. It would also help create sort of a payment system to ensure that a lot of the services that are not covered by insurance or considered extra just become part of the deal. So I know I dropped a lot of knowledge, but I do hope that I at least gave you a flavor of the issue and why you should care, and sort of what we can do as a community and a place to sort of take any energy you may be feeling and to pour it into there. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Lauren. And I know that was a lot of condensed information in a short period of time.
Can I just, there was a lot in the chat, even with people witnessing about experiencing or seeing real life bias that has happened as Black women who during maternal aspects. But like from my own experience as a registered nurse, my child had the cord around her neck heart rate was going down with the contractions. And it took my best friend to go get someone to help me and to get the care. Thankfully, she was fine, but it does happen. There's just a different response. My mother, so this just hits home. And I just think, Lauren and you, Paola, just the work that y'all do to lift this up so that we can make a difference.
Just also want to underscore, I appreciate so much the sharing and the vulnerability, because it can be hard. One thing that I really learned a lot is that, oftentimes pregnancy is like, it's this amazing, wonderful thing. But no, when I worked in global health, we would actually describe pregnancy as a trauma to the body, right? Organs are being squished, hormones are changing, your body, you can develop diabetes, it is no small thing to carry and develop life. And it takes a lot as an individual, emotionally, socially, psychologically, physically, to do that. And so to also know that there's all of these other dangers, and you might go unheard. I don't know if you guys have heard of this woman called Serena Williams. She's kind of a big deal, one of the greatest athletes of all time. And she actually almost died as a result of giving birth to her daughter, Olympia. And so she actually had to beg a nurse to check her out. She said, something is wrong. Something is wrong, and I know it. And come to find out, she actually had pulmonary embolism. So those are clots in her lungs as a result of her C-section. And if someone wouldn't take Serena Williams seriously, if she says, hey, something is wrong, can you imagine how just regular women across the board get ignored, right? And so again, if Serena Williams has to essentially beg for her life, I think that's a real indication as to just how broken the system is and how little life is actually cared for in spite of the lip service that we give. And I can drop a story to the Serena Williams, her experience, if you guys want to read a little bit more about that as well.
Yes. And as you're saying, this is one of the very real ways that we know that our racist systems kill and don't value life. I also, Lauren, and I'll drop a link in the chat to this as well. Lauren spoke in another panel about honoring the rights of poor people in a post-Roe America. But I remember you having a statistic there that just like really shook me. It was about Black women giving birth in DC and that being compared. I don't know if you want to share that, Lauren, because that really, I think it's hard when we're talking about statistics and numbers to really imagine what this crisis is, but when you shared that statistic, and so I'm asking you if you would like to share that.
Sure. And I'm actually happy to share because I spent my undergraduate at Boston College, and so this actually came from a social worker at Boston College, so it's like a combination of my two things. So I got really excited, which I guess I shouldn't be because it's really tragic what she uncovered. And in this article, and I can also drop that in the chat, this social worker found that it's actually more dangerous to give birth in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, where folks have the power to make it not be. It's more dangerous for Black women to give birth in Washington, D.C. than it is in Syria. I don't know if you guys know anything about Syria or what has just the absolute horror that has gone on in that country for over a decade now, but they're in the middle of a civil war, right? So there's a country in the midst of violent civil war where homes, communities no longer exist, where people have had to leave their country with the potential of never returning because it's unstable. If it's safer to give birth in a country like that, that's experiencing that, than it is in the nation's capital, where folks have, with a stroke of their pen, it is really not hard. And I will tell you, the momnibus does not cost that much in comparison. It really doesn't, because if we can spend over $800 trillion a year on warplanes, why can't we invest that same in women and children who are hopefully going to create, as opposed to investing in destruction? And so I think that for me was just really striking, because you can't sit here and say that, we're this great country and we care about life if you're allowing women to die in the same place that's responsible for creating the common good and protecting life.
Thanks for watching one of the 7 episodes of Clothed in Glory. And don't forget to subscribe to support SojoAction's work and see more content like this.